250,000 people a year. That is how many visitors walk past a 16-mile sourcing restriction, a prefabricated building with no refrigeration plan, and a car park that was never designed for the volume it now handles to buy products that Waitrose, Tesco, and Marks & Spencer, with a combined annual revenue exceeding £200 billion, cannot stock. Nobody saw it coming, because it was never a farm shop. It was a closed-loop provenance engine, and the people who tried to shut it down before it opened accidentally made it the most defensible retail position in British food. But here is the part that never made the television series. And this is where the story stops being about one man's farm and starts being about something the entire British food industry has not yet worked out how to respond to. Clarkson's farm gave the world the machinery, the mud, the arguments, the queues forming before the gates opened on a Tuesday morning in Oxfordshire, stretching back down a lane that had not been designed for pedestrian traffic at any scale. It gave the world Jeremy Clarkson, the son of a Paddington Bear toy salesman from Doncaster, standing in a field he did not understand, farming land he had never farmed, losing money with the resigned expression of a man who had spent 30 years being paid to have opinions and was now being charged for them. It gave the world Caleb Cooper, already there. Not cast, not recruited, not discovered through any process more sophisticated than the fact that he was doing his job in the specific field on the specific morning that the cameras arrived. The most valuable unscripted agricultural character in British television history, and nobody hired him. He was simply present. What the television series did not give the world was the supply chain. What it did not show was the network of farms, small holdings, artisan producers, and micro-dairies operating within 16 miles of Chipping Norton that Diddley Squat quietly became the anchor retail customer for. What it did not show was what that relationship meant economically, structurally, and commercially for producers who had spent careers selling at farmers markets and to local restaurants and to the occasional hotel that cared enough to ask where the food came from. And what it did not show was the single planning condition that made all of it not just possible, but permanent. Here is the number that matters. 16 miles. That was the sourcing radius imposed by West Oxfordshire District Council when Clarkson applied to expand the farm shop. 16 miles, a restriction designed, in the plainest possible reading of the council's intent, to limit the shop's ambition, to prevent its scaling, to ensure it remained, in the council's framing, proportionate to its rural setting and appropriately local in character. The council believed they were applying a constraint. They were writing a competitive moat into planning law, because 16 miles in the Cotswolds does not describe a limitation. It describes an ecosystem. Within that radius sits some of the most diverse and productive agricultural land in England: arable, pastoral, orchard, dairy, honey, rare breed livestock. Small batch preserves produced in quantities of hundreds of units, not hundreds of thousands. Products that exist at a scale Tesco cannot engage with. Products that Waitrose cannot stock because their minimum order requirements would consume an entire small producer's annual output before the end of January. Products that are, in the most structurally precise sense, unavailable to any buyer with the infrastructure and volume requirements of a national supermarket chain. Diddley Squat did not have a supermarket's buying power. It had something worth considerably more: a television audience of millions watching every product decision get made in real time, and a sourcing restriction that meant every product on those shelves existed nowhere else in British retail. That is not a shop. That is a closed system. Now, here is the part that even most people who followed this story closely have never fully joined up. And it is the reason that what happened at Diddley Squat cannot be reproduced, funded, or reverse engineered by any competitor currently attempting to do so. The shop was never designed to be profitable on its own terms. The farm returned £144 in year one. £144, a figure Clarkson announced with the deadpan resignation of a man entirely accustomed to outcomes that confirm his worst suspicions. The shop began with £44,000 in total assets. By the end of year one, those assets were £1.34 million. Not because retail margins in a prefabricated building in Oxfordshire had been revolutionized, because the shop was not measured against the farm. It was measured against the series. Every queue that formed outside the building was a production value Amazon did not have to manufacture. Every sold-out product was a plot point. Every planning refusal was a cliffhanger. Every time the council said no, the audience said, "We are coming to buy that thing the council does not want them to sell." The failure is the product. The scarcity is the marketing. The restriction is the brand. That is the most counterintuitive supply chain decision in the history of British food retail. And West Oxfordshire District Council authored it entirely by accident. Stand back for a moment and consider what the producers inside that 16-mile radius were being offered. A smallholder making artisan cheese in a quantity that no national buyer would look at twice. A honey producer whose annual output was spoken for before the season ended, sold at markets to people who drove specifically to find it. A rare breed meat supplier whose animals were raised at a pace and in a manner that the industrial supply chain does not accommodate and cannot price correctly. A preserves maker working out of a farmhouse kitchen with a production capacity that makes them invisible to every procurement team in British food manufacturing. These producers had always existed. They had always been within 16 miles of Chipping Norton. What they had never had was a retail partner whose marketing budget was underwritten by Amazon, whose credibility was guaranteed by unscripted reaction, and whose customer base included 250,000 annual visitors who had driven specifically to buy something they could not find anywhere else. A product on the shelves of Diddley Squat is not equivalent to a listing in Waitrose. It is categorically different. A Waitrose listing means you have passed a buyer's quality threshold and met a minimum volume requirement, and agreed a margin structure and accepted a promotional calendar and absorbed a cost of doing business that scales against you as the smaller party. A Diddley Squat shelf means a television audience watch someone react to your product without a script. It means the queue outside validates your price point before the customer touches the product. It means your 16-mile provenance is the entire sales argument, and nobody can undercut it because nobody else can source from your farm. Caleb Cooper understood this before anyone framed it in those terms. Caleb Cooper, who was already at Diddley Squat, who had farmed that specific land before Clarkson arrived to buy it, who brought to every decision about the farm an expertise entirely undiluted by the process of becoming a television personality, became the de facto quality signal for every product the shop considered, not by appointment, not by process, by the simple fact that when Caleb approved something on camera, it meant something that money could not manufacture. His approval could not be bought. His reaction could not be directed. His credibility was a direct function of the fact that he had never once in his professional life expressed enthusiasm for something he did not feel. Producers within that radius understood what that meant. A single unscripted moment, Caleb eating something, reacting with the specific authenticity of a man who has no commercial incentive to perform, was worth more than any placement in any food publication in Britain, more than any farmer's market stand, more than any Instagram campaign run by any rural brand attempting to borrow the credibility that Diddley Squat had accumulated simply by being genuinely, structurally, legally local. And this is where the council's planning condition becomes, in retrospect, the most consequential piece of local food policy in modern British retail history. By writing 16 miles into law, West Oxfordshire District Council made it permanently impossible for Diddley Squat to grow in the direction that would have destroyed it. They made it impossible to bring in a national supplier and dilute the provenance. Impossible to accept a distribution deal that would have made the products available everywhere, and therefore available nowhere special. Impossible to scale in the way that scaling always, without exception, erodes the specific quality that made the thing worth scaling in the first place. They thought they were applying the brakes. They were locking in the accelerator. Lisa Hogan, Clarkson's partner, and the person who built more of the commercial architecture of Diddley Squat than any public account has, properly credited, later acknowledged, that the council's restrictions were among the best things that happened to the operation. Not because hardship is romantic, because the restriction forced them to find suppliers they would never have discovered through conventional procurement. Because proximity, when it is mandatory rather than aspirational, produces relationships that volume-based retail cannot replicate at any price. She did not say this loudly. She did not need to. The £45 million total farm valuation, up from £6 million at purchase in 2008, said it for her. Consider what that number represents. It is not land value alone. The Cotswolds is expensive, but the uplift from £6 million to £45 million is not explained by agricultural land price movements. It is explained by the commercial infrastructure built around the farm, the shop, the series, the Hawkstone brewery, now carrying £21.3 million in annual revenue after growing 134% year-on-year, valued independently at £75 million, stocking 2,000 pubs across Britain, the Farmer's Dog Pub, the Producer Network, the brand, the queue. None of that existed before the council tried to stop the shop from becoming what it became. The shop is now estimated at £2 million in annual revenue, from a building, from a 16-mile radius, from products that the combined buying departments of British grocery retail cannot source, cannot replicate, and cannot price against because there is no comparison product in their range. And here is what no competitor video on this topic has reported clearly. The producers inside the radius are not suppliers in the conventional sense. They are not vendors on a margin negotiation. They are participants in a brand. Every time a visitor drives to Diddley Squat, from London, from Birmingham, from further, they are not driving to a shop. They are driving to a provenance claim made physical. They are paying, with their time and their fuel and their willingness to stand in a queue, for the experience of buying something that could only have come from exactly here. That is what the 16-mile radius built. Not a supply chain, a credibility geography, and Tesco. With £65 billion in annual revenue and procurement infrastructure built across 40 years of dominant market position, cannot enter that geography, cannot buy into it, cannot acquire it, cannot build a version of it in a business park outside Swindon and expect the queue to form. You cannot manufacture provenance. You can only inherit it, protect it, or have a planning authority accidentally legislate it into existence on your behalf. Diddly Squat did all three, simultaneously, without a strategy document. There are real risks ahead and they deserve honest naming. The series will not run indefinitely. The footfall that gives those producer relationships their commercial logic is partly a function of Clarkson's presence and Amazon's continued investment. What happens to the supply network when the cameras stop, when the queue shortens, when the national attention moves, is a question that has not been answered because it has not yet been tested. Lisa Hogan has spoken carefully about longevity. Carefully is not the same as confidently. The moat is real. Whether it holds without the drawbridge Amazon built is genuinely uncertain. But here is what is not uncertain. Every food buyer in Britain, every brand strategist working on provenance positioning for a national retailer, every regional food producer who has spent years being told their scale is their limitation, every category manager sitting in a glass office in London trying to make an own-label range feel local, they have all looked at Diddly Squat and arrived at the same conclusion. They cannot do this. Not because they lack the money, not because they lack the resource, because they lack the 16 miles, because they lack the planning restriction, because they lack the man who was already there before anyone knew to look for him, because they lack the council that spent 3 years trying to shut the operation down and instead wrote its competitive advantage into local planning law and called it a condition of approval, because they lack the Amazon contract that turned a struggling Cotswolds farm into the most watched agricultural documentary in British television history and made the queue outside a prefabricated building a national cultural event. That is not a farm shop. That is a closed-loop local food economy with global distribution, a planning-protected supply chain, and 250,000 people a year who will drive past every supermarket in Oxfordshire to reach it. The council built the walls, the cameras built the queue, the 16 miles built everything else. If you found today's story as interesting as we did putting it together, please do subscribe and tap the notification bell. It makes a real difference to this channel. We'd love to know, have you ever visited Diddly Squat? And if you did, what did you buy? And did the reality match what you expected from the television series? Drop it in the comments. We read every single one. Thank you, as always, for watching.